Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 180. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Frank Reteguiz about his American Lore series. What started out as a single story eventually became an interconnected series of novels. There are currently 6 books available in the series, which is a unique mashup of horror, fantasy, and science fiction. Frank draws inspiration for his novels from Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, and his own experience as a former police officer. He also likes to weave little-known historical facts into his stories, which he writes as modern-day fables. As for his writing process, Frank admits that he doesn't start writing anything until he knows for certain how the story will end. In this episode, I'll chat with Frank about his writing journey, his experience selling his books at festivals, art markets, and local bars, and the book promotion that has worked best for him. Buy a book, get a free shot, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Frank Reteguiz, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Oh, you're welcome, ma'am. Thank you for interviewing me.
What I thought we could do today is start by talking about your new series, the American Lore series. You've got, as of this airing, I think 6 books out. What I'd like you to do, if you don't mind, is introduce us to this series. We'll talk about the different books in turn, but give us sort of a general idea of the series and maybe tell us what inspired you to start writing these books.
So what inspired me writing these books, or the fact that I just love a good old horror story that's kind of believable in a way, or you can actually suspend disbelief for a little bit. I'm not into hard fantasy or hard sci-fi, but I like the idea of taking a grain of truth and okay, let's add a fantasy element or horror element to it. So one of my books, The Malediction of Blue and Glass, the second book in the series, I get a lot of good comments and a lot of good reviews from people who love the books, or fans who love the books, saying that they love the fact that I take historic facts and play with them and make them flow with the story. And then when they actually research it, they're surprised, oh, this is actually a real thing that happened. So a good example is in A Malediction of Blue and Glass, the main character, Blue and Glass, basically the main character has to find he made a deal with the devil to save someone he loves, but it turned out he was tricked into doing it. So he has to travel the world and try and find a way out of it. One of the places he goes to is Denver Airport, and I have a little tidbit information about the airport, and it's actually pretty interesting. There's a lot of kind of urban myths about the airport, and some of it's true. And like I said, I got fans who actually research it and they email me or message me when they research it. They're like, "Oh wow, we didn't even know that existed, or that was even true. I thought that you made that up." But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I love to write these type of stories, because I like the idea of playing around with reality.
And let's talk about the books in turn. I'm curious, do you recommend to fans that they read them in the order they're published, or are these, you said they were interconnected, are they standalones? Can they pick up any particular one and read them out of order?
So they pick up in any order. The 5th one I wrote, Apotheosis, that is a direct sequel to Malediction of Lune Glass, but I wrote them in a way where you could read them in any order.
Okay. You set these novels in sort of modern America, as you
Yeah.
term it. What was it about trying to write a lore or fables or create these sort of myths set in modern times, in a reality that we readily recognize?
Well, like I used to be a police officer, so think part of it comes from that because, as a police officer, you encounter like some weird stuff and some exciting stories and some and tragic stories too, but like you don't really get to hear about it most of the time unless something's in the news. But sometimes, most of the time, you don't get to hear those stories. And the other part of it is that I'm actually a little obsessed with Joseph Campbell, like the hero's journey, his stuff about mythology, and also I'm into psychology too, because that was my bachelor's degree psychology. So I got into Carl Jung while I was writing. So I had this idea of like, what happens if I could tell like a good story, and the way I have to do it is basically writing about it as a lore, like taking facts and taking real emotions, real stories, and putting and adding the horror and fantasy elements to it.
Let's talk about a few of the books in turn, starting with your first one, the first one that you published that sort of led to all these others. What was the spark for you that got you writing?
I would say like was me leaving the police department. Well, it was pretty tragic. Like I was a whistleblower. It was not. I didn't work for a good police department. I tried my hand at writing before and self-publishing, but I'm really honest. That first book, I don't count it because I thought it was just terrible. It was just terrible quality. But I'm glad that was kind of like the first step. But then the first book in the series, At the End of All Things, became. I mean, it kind of took a life on its own. I actually did not think it was that good, honestly, until people started buying it and I started getting reviews on it, like messages saying like, "Hey, you're a pretty good writer. Like you had me hooked like from the first chapter." But like that book was kind of me in a way, like I think a lot of writers do this, like therapy in a way, and is using kind of fiction to get your demons out.
Give us an example. You've got 6 books out. Maybe
Mhm.
give us just a brief synopsis, if possible, of one of the books, so we get a feel for what the stories are like.
Okay, so I already talked about the malediction of Lone Glass. The one I'm like, this is the one I'm proud of, but I don't get a lot of people buying it. It's the Midnight Special, and it's basic. And this one, like, it's a little detour from horror, but it's more thrillerish, more suspense. But it's a sci-fi murder mystery. Basically, it's like a who done it, but you have to use time to figure out who really did it. Basically, the setting is takes place in Louisiana in the bayous, in a mansion where you have a couple rich and powerful people show up at this mansion because the guy who owns it, a scientist, created a device that you could travel through time. And when he actually showcased the device for the first time to test it to everyone to prove it works, the first thing the device brings out, or the, the first thing that the device transports out is his dead body. So it becomes like, okay, when does he die and who actually does it?
Hmm.
And then it becomes more thrillers to suspense because there's two plot twists in there. And then I thought it was a fun book to write because I had to learn about paradoxes. So I had to research the grandfather paradox, the bootstrap paradox, and how to write that into a story where it makes sense.
It sounds like a challenge.
Yes.
So when you come up with the ideas for the books, but let me ask, do you have sort of the ideas for each of the books in the series already planned, or do you tend to take like whatever bright idea comes to you and that's the one you focus on for the next book? How does it work for you?
Well, like towards the end, well, what I've been doing with the process, because I've been trying to get these books done between 6 and 7 months. what I do is towards the end of the book I'm working on, I start playing ideas in the back of my head or start writing down ideas. And then after the editing's done and the publishing's done with that book, I take a month off and just think about it. So a good example is the newest book, The Public School Number 4 Massacre. That one, I had the idea back in my head for a year or so, but it was towards the end of Apotheosius where I was like, okay, I'm going to try to pursue this idea, see if I can write a good story about it. And basically, the idea was there's this high school, or it's an abandoned elementary school in Jacksonville, Florida. That's where I live. It has its own folklore, its own urban myths about it. Basically, the urban myth is that the school was closed down because either the janitor went crazy and killed a whole bunch of people, or the boiler exploded and killed a whole bunch of people. Neither of those, neither of those are true. What really happened was just boring. It was bureaucracy. Like something happened with the of a new road opening up, and the school was defunded, and it just became abandoned, and now became a historic site in Jacksonville. But I remember in high school, we would sneak into the school because it was like kind of like thing you did in high school, just like always go visit the haunted school, or what people call it, the devil school. And you walk in and you see that all the graffiti on the walls, you can see the old lockers, and it really has a cool, eerie feeling to it. Even though, like I said, nothing bad happened to it, it's just got shut down because of bureaucracy. But I thought it'd be cool. It's like, no, I really want to write a monster story, take place where I live in Jacksonville, and use a site that the locals know. So that's where the idea started at the end of the book of Pathesius, and then I started working on it after then. Started taking pictures of the site so I could know what it looks like, and then adding kind of like the modernness to it. So I used a specific time during the pandemic, May 20, the week of May 20th, because that's when the riots in Jacksonville were happening. During the pandemic, we had the protests and turned to riots. I was actually at the riot and I got to see kind of like the chaos too, like what was going on. I got to see what the police were doing. I got to see what the rioters were doing. And that always stuck with me. And I decided, like, okay, let's see if I can add it to the story too. And then from there, I'm like, what's going to be the theme of the story? And I chose the theme just being just complete fear for this book, and how fear affects a community in a negative way, and how then the fiction part of monster uses the fear.
Well, let's talk about your characters. I'm curious, of all the books, do you have characters that you've written that have tended to be favorites, either because their voice has been very, very loud in your head, or perhaps you've just liked them, you identify with them, or perhaps they were just really fun to write because they were really fun to hate as a character, let's say. Do you have any favorites? I know that's a hard question to ask
Yeah,
a writer.
no, there's a couple I have. In the Midnight Special, it'll be Raul Baya. He is one of the protagonists. I think like he's kind of shaped who I was as a cop and who I thought I was going to be as a cop towards the future, or towards like if I would continue down that path. So that's was a little favorite of mine. There's a character I used twice already, and once in Mount Dixon Little Glass, the second one on Pathesius, Father Windtalker. He's not the archetypical priest. He swears a lot. He's bombastic, and he likes to smoke pot. But the core of him is like what you want in the priest. Like he's someone that is compassionate, someone that he does care. He's someone that you can trust. Like you could go to and you know he's going to do the right thing for you. So he has that dichotomy to him. Another one is Lorelei, and she's the narrator in Mount Dixon and Glass. I like her because she does, even though she's a narrator and she's more like a witness, she does have her own character arc. And I do have plans to use her in the future. I know like where this series is going to go and how it's going to end. I just don't know how many books it's going to take to get to that end. But I know Lorelei is going to play an important part in that in the overall series. I just don't know what book to put her in that get to see her grow more as a character than use her towards the end of the series.
Well, and speaking of that, what are your plans for the series? And do you have some of it mapped out already, or is it all just still kind of floating around in your head and it'll get put on the page when it's ready?
Well, what I do with the other books is like I know I'm going to start a story once I know how I end it. And once I know
Mm.
how I end it, that's when I start writing. So I know how I'm going to end this series. I just don't know how to get to that point yet. I know what the ending is going to be. And like I said, Lorelai is going to play an important part. I know Agent or Raul Baya is going to play part two, and also Father Windtalker. But I think throughout the course of these books, I want them to come, even if they're not the main characters in the stories, I do want them showing up so their characters are more fleshed out and they have more attachment to the audiences. But like I said, like I know how I'm going to end it, but just don't know how to do it yet, or how many books it's going to take to end it.
Well, let's talk about how you got this series published, because you're an indie author, and
Hmm.
I'd like to talk for a bit about that part of your journey. What was it like putting these books out into the world? I'm guessing there were probably some lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, there's still lessons learned. Um, so just give you like a, I guess I should just start from the beginning. Like, I tried to get the first two books published, mainly the Malediction and Glass. So I tried to do the traditional route. Um, I think overall, maybe 200 to 300 rejections from agents and publishers. Now I got down, and then I remember reading a New York Times, not New York Times, a Times Magazine article about self-publishing. So I published my books on Amazon. Then I saw Amazon, you could, for the author, you could print the books yourself for a decent price. So I started on my days, on my weekends off, whenever I get a weekend off, because at the time I was working for Tesla, I will do art markets. So I started selling the Mount Dixon Moon Glass and At the End of All Things at art markets, and started seeing a couple of sales. I'm like, oh, this feels pretty good. Like especially when you first sell your first book. I'm like, oh my god, I did it. Then I did that for a couple of months, and I had this idea for a marketing scheme because the main setting in the Mount Dixon Moon Glass takes place in a bar. I'm like, what? What happens if I sell my books at bars? So I started a promotion called Buy a Book, Get a Free Shot. And I got like quite a few bars in Jacksonville to let me set up my little display in a bar. And if someone buys a book, I buy them a shot. And that worked for a while. I did that for maybe 2 years. I was in the news a couple of times, the local news for it. But then the pandemic happened. And when the pandemic happened, I was furloughed for 2 months. And I'm sorry this sounds bad, but like I thought those 2 months were such a good time for me because I got to take a break from work. I was walking around, I was hiking and writing more. And I just came to the conclusion too. It was like I don't want to work for someone or a company again. And I want to try and make it as an author, like a self-published author. I think I should really commit to it. And originally I was going to have a plan. I was going to wait a year to save my money and work on getting that goal accomplished. But then I got laid off in August of that year, and I just took it as an opportunity. It's like, okay, I'm going to try and make this happen. So for the past couple of years, that I guess that was yeah, almost it's going to be 3 years in August. I've been trying to sell the books full time, and most of my sales came from face-to-face sales, like going to art markets and the bar promotions. But then the bar promotions kind of got tiring, so I stopped doing that. And then like I wasn't making enough money, so I had to take another job just to pay the bills, so I can reinvest the money into marketing. But now at this phase, I'm more focusing on online sales, like learning about Facebook ads, doing newsletters better, learning about different types of advertising, and just learning about the mistakes I made and fixing those mistakes. But I'm still learning, but at least the thing is too, I'm still growing too. I'm still seeing growth.
What has been the biggest surprise for you on this writing journey? Something, now that you look back on it, something that really caught you off guard about writing the books, selling the books, the business of writing, any of it.
Hopefully, doesn't sound conceited, but learning that I'm actually good at it.
Mm-hmm.
I still feel like this at times. I feel just like I think every artist, every writer gets the imposter syndrome. I got it pretty bad when I got laid off, and I was a month into trying to make this happen. I had a bad sales weekend. I think I only made $100 off the book sales. I was worrying about money, and then the next market I was at, I was just sitting there just doubting myself, like, okay, these aren't good stories. I'm not. What am I doing? I'm a fool. And I had two separate encounters happen within like an hour of each other. The first one was a mother and her daughter, and they were one of my first customers. And they came up to me and said, "Oh my God, we saw you again. We wanted to tell you we loved your book." And like, "Oh, great, you have a second one. We're gonna buy it. We want to buy it. We just love what you wrote." That felt good because that and with that edition of the book, there's still grammatical errors. I got those fixed now, but like I still kind of feel embarrassed. Like, ugh, I could have been. I need to get better editors for that. But then the second encounter happened an hour later, and this was a woman who she's friends with one of the vendors that's at some of the markets I used to do. She walked up to me and she's like, "Hey, I just want to let you know that I'm becoming your number one fan. Like, I read your book a couple of months ago, and I gave it up to someone else so they could read it. But whatever book you write, I want to be the first to buy it." And she bought the other book. I mean, it's just that what's the word? Not recognition, but that kind of like affirmation
Mm-hmm.
or confirmation
Mm-hmm.
that you're going after something, and just like anything, if you're going after a business, you're trying to grow your own business or trying to grow your own podcast or anything like that. You want to know if it's good or not, because if it's not good, then either you have to fix it or you have to look at doing something else. But it's nice just having those two encounters, especially at a time when I was a lot of doubt in what I was doing.
Yeah. Is being a writer, publishing books, is this something you always wanted to do when you were a kid? Was being an author
I
something you aspired to?
originally, so it's weird because in the back of my head, I knew I wanted to write, but I was just talking to my girlfriend about this too, and I wasn't really encouraged to do it. My original goal was to become an FBI agent, and also with that goal is I did interviews for FBI, and I did get rejected. But when I got rejected, I was not heartbroken. I was like, I took it as like maybe that's a sign I should not pursue this goal anymore. Because if I wasn't heartbroken by it, then that means it wasn't something I really desired to do.
Mm-hmm.
But with the writing, I always liked writing, but I wasn't really encouraged until college when my psychology professor talked to me in his office, and he said, like, "Frank, I'm giving you a 98 on this paper. You're not getting 100 because your grammar sucks, but you're getting 98 because you're such a good writer." It's like you kept me engaged the whole time. This wasn't boring. This topic could have been really boring, but you didn't make it boring. Like you kept pulling me in, and you had me satisfied after I read your paper. So I just wanted to give you that compliment. That was kind of like the stepping stone or the sign, like maybe I should get into writing, but I didn't really get into writing until maybe 2004, 2015, when I was probably 26.
So now that you're on your way, and we know that you have plans for more books in this series, do you have any other goals as a writer? Anything else you want to do on this journey?
So this sounds silly, but I hope one day, like one of my books gets made into a movie, not because it's an ego thing, because I just love movies. I love films. Like I one day want to actually be on a set and actually learn how what happens behind the movie, like the production, the director, what the gaff, what the gaffer does, and hopefully one day that might lead to me becoming a director or me doing something with movies. Because, like I said, it's not an ego thing. It's just like I love movies. I love how they're made. I love the trivia behind them. No, I love different directors and different writers' styles of making a movie. So I'm really deep into that. I'm hoping that my writing does take me to that place.
Well, let's hope so. So in the meantime, if people want to learn more about you and your books and things that you have going on, where
Mhm.
should they go to find you and that information?
You can find me on my website. It is rickandlewins.com. RickandLewins. Social media, and I'm on Amazon, Apple Books. Also, a couple audiobooks are available on Spotify and different audiobook distributors too. Or you could just Google my name.
Perfect.
I got a unique name, so it's going to come up on the search engine.
Good. Good. Well, let's hope people find you and buy some of your books. Well, Frank, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast, and I want to wish you luck with American Lore, all the books that you still have planned, as well as the ones that are currently out for everyone to purchase and love. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you. Thank you for interviewing me.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.